Welcome to Baffled, the podcast where we help you understand your misunderstood teen. My name is Jonathan, and if you've ever felt confused, frustrated, or even heartbroken watching your teen make choices that you don't understand, you're in the right place. We're here to unpack the challenges that teens face today and give you practical tools to bridge the gap between confusion and connection. Today, I'm sitting down with someone who's dedicated his life to teens that society has often written off. Dr. Pedro Rodriguez is the founder and the executive director of Urban Youth Justice, a Tampa-based organization that mentors, coaches, and counsels justice-involved youth. He's also the author of Urban Youth Survival Guide, a manual for overcoming the odds, a book that challenges us to see beyond the labels and understand how influences shape perspectives which trigger reactions. Dr. Rodriguez believes that when we learn to respond instead of react, transformation becomes possible, not just for the teens in the justice system, but also for our teens. So whether your teenager is struggling, thriving, or somewhere in between, this conversation is going to challenge how you see the young people in your life. Let's dive in. All right, Pedro, so tell us your story. What led you to start the Urban Youth Justice?
Man, so what led me to start Urban Youth Justice is a personal drive to create something that would offer a solution for a problem that I had in my own personal life. So growing up, first and foremost, I was born to teenage parents, right? Already at a disadvantage in a poor neighborhood of Jersey City, and lost my father at 12, didn't have, so great of a relationship with him, didn't get to know him that well. He was, battling his own addiction and wasn't home, mostly working and at bars after work. And so it left me with a big hole, and I, did what most kids do is they incline to where they can find belonging, some gang life, some street life, whatever it may be. For me, it was, hey, hang out with the cool kids, and ended up getting in trouble, had my first criminal charge at the age of 13. I didn't waste no time. After he passed away, I got into trouble. My grades declined. I found myself lost. My mom was battling with drug addiction as well. And so I was kind of like in a orphan stage, I guess, and went to live with my grandparents. They could only do but so much for me in the sense that, they provided a roof and a plate, but, um, they couldn't engage with me as much as I needed as far as, having my parents. And so I found the streets, began to try, smoking weed and stealing. I just got into trouble. I got caught in a stolen vehicle. I had a bunch of juvenile charges, and I found myself caught up in the juvenile justice system. And it took me down a spiral where now I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to drop out. By my 10th grade, I was already like, I'm done with school. I ain't even finishing my high school diploma. And I had already accumulated so many charges that they wanted to send me away to a program. And it was either go and do some time or accept the program. So I took the program route, which allowed me to get a GED, a trade of some sort that was disciplined. It was a military program called Job Corps. In Edison, New Jersey. They sent me off over there. And so I ended up, experiencing all of this early, even into my early adulthood. And when I turned 18, I added more problems by becoming a father. 2 times, all right, two daughters back to back, 18, 19, two different baby mamas, you know what I'm saying? Which, I just kept complicating my life. I was just on a spiral. And so by the time I was in my early 20s, I already had, my juvenile charges were behind me, but then I started to accumulate a couple of adult charges. I was finding it a hard time to look for a job when I finally came out of that street life. I began to sell drugs to survive. I was on survival mode. My first daughter's mother was the one who actually led me to Christ.
Amen.
Who later becomes my wife for 23 years, 28 together. And I lost her 4 years ago to cancer. And so she was a big part of my life, helped me make that pivot in life. I encountered Christ in 1998, and he just, began to transform me. And so I became, a leader in my church pretty quickly, started to grow and learn the word. And they were already speaking that over my life. Like, you're going to do some work with the youth. God's going to use you. And I was like, I don't know about that, and then, I ended up, helping out with youth, doing street ministry, just different things I did with youth until I eventually got tired of a lot of the getting turned down by jobs because I had a criminal record, or getting jobs, but they
Mm.
paid very low
Mhm.
wages because of the consequences and stuff. I didn't have an education. I had dropped out. So now all my
Mhm.
consequences are starting to hit me,
Yeah.
I got children to provide for. All these things were adding up, and I was like, man, I need to get my life together, man. I'm in my 20s
Mhm.
now, walking with the Lord, but my life wasn't
Mhm.
pretty. It was a mess. A lot of stuff, yeah, we come to Christ and he begins to transform. We're a new creation, but there's a lot of consequences and stuff
Mhm.
that we have to deal with, layers that have to be peeled, so
Mhm.
with that said, I ended up, experiencing transformation later on, going through, even marriage issues. I didn't know, I never had the ideal marriage painted for me. And
Mhm.
I had committed some sinful things that almost destroyed my marriage because I was still battling childhood trauma and different things
Mhm.
that were affecting my decisions. No example of a father, no example of a husband, really. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So
And what
I,
does
le-
even a
I
godly husband and a godly father even
yeah.
look like when you don't have an example?
Yeah, and you look to the streets for it, and all you know is the streets tell you that a real man has multiple women, or a husband. What's a husband? We don't get married. We just
Mhm.
have multiple women and stuff, and that's something to brag and boast about, but it isn't. And so, um, I ended up buying my first home. I started to work. I started to, you know, hustle and grind. Me and my wife, at the time, we were doing what we did, and we ended up buying our first home. That was a big, accomplishment. I was young. We had our last child, which was the only child we had in wedlock, and so I mean, in a covenant, not out of wedlock. And so we ended up selling our house later and moving to Florida. I felt the Lord was calling us. I was not the type to do something spontaneous.
Mhm.
I was more of a plan. I've always been a guy to plan and think things out thoroughly. And something was just telling me, man, it's time to leave Jersey, and I was already there so long. I had good and bad memories, and I wanted like a fresh start. And my kids were older now, and I was like, yeah, maybe it's time. And doors open. We prayed about it. We sold the house. We moved to Florida in 2014. While I was in Jersey, I did start to work. Um, better jobs where I was actually able to get like jobs working in social services, where I was able to help youth that were foster care, different, doing advocacy work, mentoring. So I took that passion in what I was doing. I also did a lot of substance abuse counseling and stuff,
Mhm.
with adults, because I decided to go back to school and get a degree in counseling. And well, I started with a certification, and then I just realized I want to just go all out.
Mhm.
I ended up getting two counseling degrees within the next several years. Even after I moved here, I graduated with my master's, and so when I got to Florida, I started to volunteer.
Mhm.
I felt the tug for youth, and I was like, okay, but then God narrowed it down and said, okay, you could work with youth in all different types of settings.
Mhm.
But I realized that my heart was calling me towards kids that were incarcerated, kids that were
Mhm.
fatherless, kids that were really like, not your typical kids that come to church, or that been going to church all their lives. It was more
Mhm.
these street kids. And so I started to find jobs here in Florida working with kids on probation, which
Mm.
opened doors for me to meet people in the juvenile justice system.
Mm.
And I started to volunteer. I also got a job doing youth director work at a local church, which after doing that for 2 years, I realized like I'm not called to do your typical youth ministry, although I
Mhm.
respect it and it's important. But even my pastor told me at the time, like, I see what God is doing, and maybe it's time for you to like, launch your own. And I started to hear this whole thing about nonprofit, and I was like, what is that? I don't even know nothing about leading a nonprofit, right? And so I began to study nonprofits, leadership, and just learn, pick people's brains. I had some mentors in my corner that I met that were long-standing nonprofit leaders for 20, 30 years, successful ministries.
Mhm.
So I was like, man, these are the people I need to be around, So I
Mhm.
started to, tap in with them. And next thing you know, in 2019, right before COVID, we launched UYJ, Urban Youth Justice. It is a 501c3 nonprofit faith-based organization. And I'm also under an umbrella a bigger organization called Every Youth, Every Facility,
Mm-hmm.
which their mission is to reach every youth in every facility with the gospel. And
Mm-hmm.
so they covered me and say, hey, we want to resource you, we want to train you. I went into a lot of training, and then plus all the experience with Young Life, Youth for Christ,
Mm-hmm.
Sozo Missions, different organizations that I worked with. I just got to see a lot about youth ministry. I read a
Mm-hmm.
lot of books on urban youth ministry as well. And now I was confident to launch my own 19. We started to go to like just one or two. As in fact, I started alone. I started
Mm-hmm.
alone, and I ended up going in with a boombox. And my I was just me, a boombox, and a Bible. You know what I'm saying? Just going in with some snacks and just showing up, and kids were like, "Who's this guy?" Right? And the minute I would start talking and speak their language and relate and share my testimony, and they was like, "Oh wow, this guy is an older version of us, or he knows where we at. He knows what we've been through." When I talk to them about fatherlessness and all this stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
mind you, at that time I was already being shaped into a counselor. I had my degree, so I was
Mm-hmm.
I was not just coming at them from a ministerial perspective, but from a professional perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and asking them
Yeah.
questions that were challenging the mind to help them be renewed. And so this went on for a while until other doors were opening. I was getting recognition. People were reaching out. Hey, can you come over here? Can you come over there? And I was like, really? Whoa. But then I was like, man, I need a team. So I
Yeah.
started praying. I met a bunch of people in the Christian hip hop community. Next thing you know, a lot of them brothers like, yo, we want to get in. We want to start serving with you. Lead the way. So I started,
Mm-hmm.
getting all these facilities opening doors, and we were going Saturdays, Mondays, for whatever day we can go. We were
Mm-hmm.
going in for like hour and a half, and we would just share our testimony, share the gospel, give them snacks, play some Christian hip hop for them. They were like, man, I never heard music like this before, man. Wow, that's
Yeah.
dope. And man, it was just seeing, even the staff were like, yo, man, you guys are amazing. You guys got to keep coming. And then we just started to expand, brother. I
Yeah.
mean, it went from just a couple, from me to a couple volunteers, to now we have about 50 on the team, spread out in 10 different facilities in
Mm-hmm.
different regions of the state. We're covering South, Panhandle, and Central. You know what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a lot of great work has been done over the last 7 years. Even with COVID happening in 2020, which threw us out of the facilities, they locked us out and said we can't go in. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We had favor, and we were actually one of the first ones to be let back in before they were even fully clear to let people in. They just made us wear masks though.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to go and like do ministry with masks on, which was a little uncomfortable, but we made it happen. And even while we were in that COVID season where people couldn't go out at certain places or go in certain places, we used Zoom. We
Mm-hmm.
actually had correctional officers inside connect the TV to a laptop with Zoom, and we were able to tune
Yeah.
in with the kids, and we were able to bring them stories, gospel, everything. They was like, "Yo, this is crazy!" Like technology made it possible, man.
Amen.
So,
That's good because so with one of the ministries I oversee at New Life Solutions is More to Life, and More to Life is our youth development arm. And our tagline is we want young people to know that their choices affect their future.
yeah,
And what you are sharing is like you were in your 20s and you began to see like, man, even though Jesus saved my life, even though my life has changed, the choices that I made in my youth are catching up to me. I remember I was in a similar situation, similar season, because in my youth, I would foolishly quit jobs. Like I wouldn't give them 2 weeks notice or anything
yeah,
like that. And I remember I came to Christ. I was on unemployment
mm,
and I was way more mature. I was like disciplined. I was responsible. And there was a job that I used to work at where I was a store manager at before, but I didn't give them 2 weeks notice and I quit. And then my old store was looking for a store manager again. And it was in Bergen County in Jersey. So you know how they have
yeah,
those blue laws where they were closed on Sundays.
yes,
So I was like,
yes.
man, Lord, can you please open this door again? I can have my old job. I can go to church on Sundays. And the district director said, hey, listen, I wish we can hire you, but we red flagged you in the system already. Like if you would have left with 2 weeks notice, you would have been rehirable, but the system is telling us that you are unhirable. It doesn't matter that you grew up. It doesn't matter that you matured. It even doesn't matter that you had this religious experience that's triggering all that. It's like It is what it is. So as you were sharing that story, it just reminded me like that we try to tell them like, hey, the decisions you make today, like as young as you are, as immature, as lack of a better words as you are, it can catch up to you. Like even the stuff you post on social media, the stuff that you post on, it's going to it's going to find you. So a lot of what you do is kind of like you are ministering to teenage you. Like you're looking at the people, and I even kind of identify myself. Like I grew up with a single mom in a similar environment. By God's grace, I did not get caught up in the system. Like God, I would say the reason I probably didn't get caught up was because of the prayers of my grandmother and my mother and my parents, like that I didn't get caught up on some things. But so obviously you referenced that you ended up getting your bachelor's, your master's, and even a doctorate now. And
Yes.
then even that it propelled you to write your book, Urban Youth Survival Guide. So with that, what kind of prompted you to write this book? Because I'm looking at your website. I see that the vision for what you do is to see the generational cycle of broken fatherless homes in our urban communities come to an end. And, every time I talk to different people, you hear a lot of the caricatures that you hear that the biggest problem in Black and brown communities is fatherlessness. And to an extent, yes. But I praise God for ministries like yours. They're like, okay, it's a problem. How can we break the cycle? And then the mission is to teach, train, and mentor justice impacted youth in Florida to restore hope and redirect their future. So it's like if we can get a hold of them, because I'm convinced that C.S. Lewis talks about suffering being God's megaphone, and how God has their ear because they're in the system. They're either in these juvenile detention centers. They have a lot of time to think.
Yes.
The system is providing mentors, whether it's faith-based or not, to help them not be back in here. Like we are trying to honestly help you, and praise God that you are in these spaces where these kids can be forgotten. And you're like, hey, we're trying to give you the resources. Jesus can change your life. He changed my life. But it's not just to change life. You also need tools. You also need skills. So what prompted you to write the book?
Yeah, good. So in all my years of now, doing this, like I said, 7 years with UIJ and then several years of volunteering. Obviously the one thing I noticed is, there was a lot of fatherlessness. When I go into rooms, in fact, and I introduce myself, right? I always introduce myself, introduce the ministry, introduce why we're there, so these kids can lower their guard and be like, okay, these guys are not, I'm not here to just preach at you. I actually want to just have a conversation. I actually just like having Q&A. And one of the questions I ask the kids is like, yo, how many of you actually have a father in the house, or in your life? And man, it's sad when you see, when you're in a room of 20, 30 kids and one hand goes up, two hands go up, and you're like, man. And even the ones that have a father, I'm saying, how's your relationship
Mm,
from a 1 to 10? And some of them are like, yeah, 5, we're all right, we don't get along that well. Or I'm like, oh man. So this is a constant thing. And then when I bring up the M word, mentorship,
mm-hmm,
it's like another language. They're like, what's that? What's a mentor? They don't even know what that is, right? So I'm
mm-hmm,
like, man, I wrote my dissertation defense, for faith-based mentorship being the game changer
mm-hmm,
as a solution for fatherlessness. I think if men from every church would find a youth in their neighborhood to come alongside them and
mm-hmm,
put that young man under your wing and spend just maybe a couple hours a week with him,
mm-hmm,
you could have such a huge impact on that kid's life,
mm-hmm,
And so why I wrote the book, or what prompted me to write that book, is that, for many years, all my experience, I saw how it was impacting. I traveled a lot. We did Stop the Gun Violence tour. I've seen a lot of kids' lives get taken. I've seen lives get changed, and I've seen some kids' mothers who called me and said, I lost my baby boy. He's gone. And I'm like, no way. It broke my heart to hear that, with kids that I actually shared the gospel with went back home and
mm-hmm.
went back to their old ways, because that's all they know. They didn't have
Yeah.
anybody there to say, hey, let's hang out, let's get out this neighborhood, let's go get a job, let's go, And so all of those experiences I felt for a while. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
this book was kind of like sitting for a while because
Mm-hmm.
I had been saying it's time for me to put all my expertise. I guess I was kind of waiting to finish my doctoral degree, right? Most
Mm-hmm.
people who have a doctoral degree have a book and or more.
Yeah, the
And so,
dissertation becomes a book.
yeah, exactly. That's another thing too. So, which my dissertation was interesting because the school allowed me to do a 75-page one, which is short. But then they said, can you do the other half in a documentary, a
Mm-hmm.
60-minute documentary? So
Okay.
I have a full documentary on what I'm talking about fatherlessness and faith-based mentors.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to put everything that I talk about, everything that I've been, my story. My wife always said, that I would one day write a book, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, one day I will. I think I want to do that, in fact. And then as I started to put the table of contents together and all that, she ended up getting sick and
Mm-hmm.
passing away. So I kind of put this project on a back burner because I was like, well, my mind and emotions ain't there right now, and I
Mm-hmm.
just don't have the energy. But as I started to grieve and get a little further down the road, I did pick up. My
Mm-hmm.
professor was reaching out to me, and she told me, "Hey, I need you to finish this. You
Mm-hmm.
went too far not
Yeah.
to finish your doctoral or whatever." So after that, I said, "Yeah." The next goal was 20 in the beginning of 25, a year ago, because we're in the beginning of 26. I
Mm-hmm.
had said this year my goal is to finish this book and release it before the end of the year.
Okay.
And guess what? And guess what? I released it on Christmas Day. So, but yeah,
11th hour.
but the reason I wrote this book is because I wanted to put everything
Mm-hmm.
that UIJ stands for, what I've experienced, all my knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, pour it into a book and put it into the hands of a youth.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just a book to read and bore them to death with a story, but captivate them with a story that resonates with them. But there's reflection questions in between each chapter
Mm-hmm.
that makes them think, and kind of moves them in a different direction. And so I think that's the difference between this and other youth ministry books or whatever. This one has questions, it challenges them. There's a story and they're being told, but there's a lot of practical. UIJ is not just, yeah, we're faith-based. We don't just go in there and start preaching repentance and going to hell, all that stuff. No, we do teach the gospel. We do it in a different form than other ministries. We like to make it relational. We like
Mm-hmm.
to speak their language, even street slang, and so that's what we do. And that's what's in that book.
Okay. Yeah, I'm reminded as you were sharing that. I remember when I first came to Christ. So I got saved in Passaic, New Jersey. I was selling drugs, throwing parties. And when I said yes to Jesus, I told my dad, who was living in Massachusetts at the time, and we had an estranged relationship. I said, you need to come get me.
Yeah.
I need to, because what you're sharing is, if I try to follow the Lord, my friends are not going to let me. I don't have any Christian friends. I have nothing but bad influences. I knew enough that if I'm going to take this life seriously, I needed a new environment. And many times when these kids, like, they have this radical transformation in juvie or in jail, they come home, and if there's not a redemptive community waiting for them, it's only a matter of time that they're going to revert back into certain things. Because, like you were mentioning earlier in your story, like, it was hard for you to land a good job because they're like, no, you don't got your degree. Nope, you got all these things on your record. So there's an aspect where they can begin to look back to the streets because they're like, man, I did my time and now I'm losing hope. Like, I'm supposed to believe that God wants to provide for me, but what's going on? And this is to your point where the men in the church, like, should come in and help. And if they own like a construction company, if they own, like, if they have this is where they should take some of these youth under their wing. I'm thinking about one of my own cousins he came home from jail, was living in one of those Christian halfway homes. He didn't call it transition home. And he's like, yeah, I'm in this home because I can't go back to my mom's house. Like, my mom's not saved. I need to be around like Christian brothers 20. And there's like, I disciple some young guys, And to me, I'm convinced, like, okay, yeah, you need to go to a teen challenge, bro. You need to be in a 6 month, 1 year heavy, intensive, heavy program, because, like, you give the enemy an inch, he's gonna try to take a yard.
Mm.
And so when you're when we're dealing with parents, and let's say they may come to you, I'm afraid that I'm gonna lose my son to the streets. Like, he and his dad were not together. Like, you're hearing this. Like, I'm a single mom, but I'm a Christian. And I hear this even with my job, where it's like, I want to go take my sons to church, and they don't want to come with me. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose them to the streets. When a parent discovers that their teen is heading down a difficult path, what's the first thing, although well-meaning, they get wrong? Like, they mean well, but they end up doing some of the things that actually continue to push them in that direction.
Yeah, a lot of times what I've seen is when kids are starting to stray down the wrong path and they find out. Well, here's one of the common ones I get. Mothers, when they first find out that their teenagers are smoking weed, they're hanging out with the wrong people. They're not following the rules, coming home late, and they find out, oh yeah, he was with a girl, and I'm not condoning any of it. What they want to do is, they want to sin patrol, you know what I'm saying, and try to, like, force the kid to do certain things when the kid's already showing signs. They want to, overcompensate and discipline them in a way that is not going to help them really understand what's going on, And so I think one of the major issues is that parents aren't willing to understand this generation. They want their kids to understand them and how they were raised, but they're not understanding how to speak, their language. And that's what I'm seeing a lot, is that parents have lost how to communicate with this generation because they're not easy to communicate with. They're very different. Gen Z was called screeners. So we're also seeing where this generation has been the most biblically illiterate. They've strayed away from their things. We see a lot of teenagers straying from the church at a certain age. They're being persuaded by, social media, worldly things, and parents are just, like, well, you have to go to church and you have to do this. And I get it that, parents should keep some discipline and control over their kids, but it's counterproductive, because sometimes you got to let your kids go through what, understand that when they're becoming teenagers, yeah, they're not adults, but they're already starting to make these choices on their own, and you have to kind of let them make these choices and learn from their mistakes, because you can't cushion your child. You can't you're not going to stop your child from doing everything. You're not going to be with your child 24/7. In fact, a lot of the trouble they're going to get into is right in their school. Right in their school, and so parents want to, they panic. Oh, I need to send my kid away to the military. Oh, I need to send my kid to a program. My kid needs counseling. Okay, yes, but all of that has to be voluntary, because if you force them to do it, they can rebel. It ain't gonna be effective, and if they go to a program and the program knows that they don't want to be there, when they won't even keep them. I've gone through this numerous of times, taking cell phones, they'll find another one, like I went through that. I raised 5 kids, I mean, all my kids are adults, and I went through all kinds of stuff with my kids, from
Where there's a
experiment.
will, there's a way.
Yeah, yeah. When it was weed, they found a way. When it was sneaking off with a girl, they found a way. No matter how much I did take away, force them. There comes an age where you have to let a child. I mean, I'm talking to Christian parents, right? There comes an age where you have to let a child encounter Christ for himself. He can no longer be following after mom and dad's Jesus. You know what I'm saying? He's got to know Jesus for himself and want Jesus for himself, right? Not that you're forcing it on him, and he's like, yeah, this whole religion thing, I don't know if it's for me. And they start doubting, and then they look at your behavior and they're real quick to say, oh, well, I can't take this serious because my mom is not living the life, or my father's not being an example, and they look for any little reason to go into their sinful ways. It's, chase after whatever they desire. And so, yeah, we have to be balanced. We have to be willing to have the hard discussions and listen to them, not just be, talking over them and making them feel like they don't have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
We might do ourselves a great favor in educating. I started to read a lot of books on Gen Z. I
Mm-hmm.
studied psychology. I started learning about the brain because I started seeing my own children making poor choices, and I'm like, man, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
How do I handle this? And so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a lot, and because we 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 want what's best for them. We love them, and I am a fan, and not everybody agrees with, like, sometimes tough love. Sometimes you have to let them fall.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that bent. I think it's probably, I'm also biologically probably wired that way, where mom is gonna want to step in and save, and I'm gonna be like, nope,
Uh-uh.
let him learn. Um, because not for nothing, that's how I learned. Like there was times I wasn't a teenager. I was like 21, and what ended up happening is I was caught guilty by association. So now I'm sitting in a jail cell,
Mm.
asking my mom to bail me out, and she was like, "Nah, I'm gonna let you sit there. I'm gonna come get you tomorrow. I'm not coming right now." And like letting me kind of sit there with the consequences, like, well, snap, like I can't be hanging out with these individuals anymore, else this is just gonna get worse. This, like, by God's grace, like, I wasn't the one in trouble. We were all in the car together. Like, it is what it is. So with that, you do mentoring, life coaching, you do these life skills things. What makes these approaches work when traditional punishment doesn't?
Good question. So these professional approaches, whether it's life coaching, right? You're helping the kids set goals. You're helping the kids discover purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You're helping them drive forward because a lot of kids, especially in teen years, they're impulsive. They don't set goals. They're not
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the future at all. So
Mm-hmm.
they need some mental stimulation to motivate them to, like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
do you understand that your consequences, I mean, your choices today, you'll be paying for them later. So let's start setting goals because I didn't set goals either at that age,
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I had.
Yeah.
So then there's the counseling piece, which deals with the underlying issues, the deeper issues underneath the surface, where, how has your father not being with your mom affected you?
Mm-hmm.
Or how is you seeing your parents struggling with drug addiction like I did? How is, we got to get to the root. A lot of times when kids are acting out,
Mm-hmm.
they're acting out because they're looking for love. They're
Mm-hmm.
missing something. Something in their life is missing. The
Mm-hmm.
parent is trying to fill that void with a whole bunch of stuff, that's not going to deal with the root. Yeah, we know obviously if Christ is in the child's life, a lot can happen, and God can heal and transform them. But still in the physical, sometimes we can be so hyper spiritual that
Mm-hmm.
we forget the important aspect of what are the kids' physical needs, right? They need affection. They need to be known. They need to know they're loved, right? They need a father. They need discipline. They need, and some of these things are missing when the household is not operating.
Affirmation, like, I'm proud of you.
Yes, yes, exactly. And when the house is not operating under God's design
Mm-hmm.
and it's a broken home, you got to almost expect that. I tell parents, even when parents that come to me with younger kids, I said, well, I got to be honest. I need you to buckle your seatbelt and prepare us for what's about to happen. I'm not predicting or calling this out in the negative, but it's bound to happen. Just be ready. And every time I've said that to a parent, months, years later, they're like, Pedro, you were right. You were right. This kid is acting up. And I'm like, yeah, I'm telling you. So let's come up with some solution, teaching them life skills. They don't teach that in school. They don't have a life skills class in, well, school, that teaches life skills, right? So it's important to teach these kids, money management, all these different things, how to
Mm-hmm.
control their emotions, anger. Anger tends to be a huge
Mm-hmm.
one. And I battled with anger from young to even into my early adulthood. It was affecting my marriage and my parenting until my family had to confront me and say, hey, you're pretty sharp with that tongue. You're
Mm-hmm.
cutting us. You're cutting us.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, like, man, I'm angry. I'm still holding on to things that my family did to me or what they or what they failed to do for me. They neglected me and abandoned me due to drugs. And so, I tell parents, I say, I've had parents call me saying, "Oh, he's punching holes in the wall in the room. He's throwing stuff. He's even kids that are getting aggressively violent with their mothers because there's no man in the home." And I'm like, whoa, this is dangerous. So there's a lot that has to be addressed. And it just, you can't put a band-aid on it. You got to get to the root. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to take my kid to youth group and everything's going to be fine and they're going to be patched up." No, there's a lot more work that has to happen than that.
Hmm.
Yep.
So I know a lot with what you do. What I do loosely, I step in. I do presentations once in a while. I have someone who I oversee, Jason, and he does a lot of in the schools, and sometimes he will give these presentations to juvenile arbitration because it's part of their probation. And we'll talk about some of the things like setting goal setting, time management. What does healthy relationships look like?
Yes.
But in the summer, we're at a lot of these rec centers, and some of these rec centers and YMCA are in underprivileged, under-resourced environments. And like when it's me, my whole communication like changes because I begin to see myself, and I'm not as joyful and jolly and hey, and fun. I come in almost like Joe Carter from Lean on Me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I come in like I'm not your friend. And listen, I understand none of y'all want to be here. And let's get that out the room. You don't want to be here. You don't like me. I'm here to serve you guys. I'm here because I want to be here.
Yeah.
And so then it's like it almost like they kind of need it. And I laugh because it's like, now I'm coming to put in structure. You guys don't have structure in your lives at home. Here's the one time I'm going to give you guys structure. I'm the boss. Y'all got to listen to me. And how that is beneficial in a sense to some of these kids, because I think they like it and they crave it. They crave someone actually, "Oh, you're leading me and you're telling me what it is." And then I kind of peeled back, and sometimes the conversations I have, "Hey, I've been in your situation. I've been in these summer school programs. I'm doing what I'm doing now by the grace of God. Had God not been in my life, I'd probably be in jail, or I'd probably be 6 feet under, and I would not be living the life I'm living." So with that, it can be very hard. But with that, there are occasional means of grace where God will show you that your work is not in vain. Can you kind of share a story of transformation that you've witnessed that has kind of encouraged you, like when you hear those sad stories of kids that you are ministering to, and then you hear that sad phone call, that mom calling you to say, "I lost my son," which can kind of destroy your drive and your motivation, or even reignite to some sense. But like whenever you see that someone is actually picking up on it and they say yes to Jesus and they are applying everything that you're saying, like, have you seen areas like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have several stories of success stories where I've seen kids be transformed, by the gospel. And there's one that I shared recently on social media. It's one of my really more heart touching stories because, it was one that. So I've worked with a lot of kids and I've seen them change, but this one particular gentleman, I got to see him get sentenced. I met him at a Sarasota County jail. He was there as a juvenile, but in an adult prison. So I already knew he was in a bad position.
He was tried as an adult.
Yes, and so when I met him, I never asked him what he did. I just knew he was there for something serious. And I always never made it a habit of asking kids why they're there. It's more like I want to earn their trust so that they can tell me freely without me asking them. And that's how it usually happens. People are like, "Mr. Pedro, you don't know what I did." And I'm like, "Well, you feel like sharing with me, fine, but you're not obligated to tell me that, because at the end of the day, no matter what you've done, I'm going to treat you the same. Whether you took somebody's life, whether you just stole the candy bar, I'm gonna love you the same." And so he didn't tell me right away, and we began in this particular jail, I wasn't able to always interact with the kids physically. They were behind cells, so they would only let a few come out at a time because they would fight. So he was behind the cell, and I would go from cell to cell. I would grab a kid's hand. I was like, hey, can I pray with you? My name is Pedro. What are you going through? What's going on? And they would let me pray with them. But this one kid was like, hey, he had a Bible sitting there, and we started to talk, and I was like, well, what are you reading? And we got into a whole Bible conversation. And the next thing you know, he's like, when you coming back? You seem to know a lot, man. I really want to know more about this Bible. And I was like, well, you know what? I'll tell you this. When I come back, I'm going to see how the room is. But if you're the only one that really wants my attention, I'll focus in on you. And it became like I was going to visit him, really, because the other kids, yeah, they showed interest. I talked to them a little bit. I would share some gospel with them. But he was like hungry, like really hungry. Something was happening in him. The Holy Spirit was already working way before I got there, right? And so when I sat with him on the floor, outside of his cell, and we're talking through the bars, and I'm like, so what are you reading? Let me see, what verse are you struggling with? Let me tell you the context to it, whatever. That went on for several months. This young man, started to just call me his mentor. Man, I love you, Pedro. I look up to you, whatever. I had a job change, unfortunately, that took me out of going there that night in that time frame and stuff. And some time had passed, different things happened. I would say maybe almost a whole year. And I get a letter from him. I had given him my contact. He writes a letter saying, hey, my attorney would like to speak with you. This is his number. I call the attorney. The attorney then tells me, hey, would you be willing to testify on his behalf? And I was like, absolutely. He's like, you're a counselor, right? You got credentials. I was like, yeah. He's like, well, I need a professional that's worked with him to say that, he's shown some change. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. He did show some change. I saw, his mindset was very different. And so I end up testifying at his court. Long story short, he didn't want to cooperate in the beginning of the case and snitch on his co-defendant. So the judge came out and was not lenient on him for that, and heard both sides. There was gunplay involved. There was people robbed at gunpoint. So they were taking it very serious, and the judge came back out and sentenced him to 10 years in an adult prison. And when that happened, his mother shot out the courtroom screaming. His grandmother fell to the floor. I was devastated. I was like, oh my God, no way. Like, he had no criminal record. He was a star football player. He was a good kid. He just had no mom because she's on drugs, and the father was MIA. I don't even know where his father is, honestly. So this kid was dealt a bad hand. Yeah, he was doing well in school. He got caught up with the wrong kids. Chose one bad decision that cost him a long time in prison. Meanwhile, we stood talking through JPay, email, phone calls for the next 8 years. And every time I talked to him, he was like, oh, I'm reading the Bible. They're calling me preacher man here. I'm sharing the gospel. I'm like, oh my God, I met this kid when he didn't even really know Christ. He ends up doing prison time, which you would think he goes to prison and just forgets about Jesus, right? Like, oh, I'm in prison now.
Jesus didn't come save me out there.
Yeah. He could have taken that approach, or he could have just joined the gang and forgot about the whole Christian life, right? But no, this guy stood the course. And to this day, I just spoke to him 2 weeks ago. I finally found him because I lost contact while he was in there because the email system changed. I was able to track him down through a friend. And next thing you know, we talked on the phone like last Saturday. And he was like, Mr. Pedro, I'm coming home in March. My family's going to do me a coming home party. I was like, man, let me know when and where. I want to be there. I want to be one of the first ones to hug you and congratulate you for coming back as still a man of God. And he was like, yeah, I want to join your ministry. Like, he was just excited. And I'm like, man, just to see that he stood the course and he was still walking with the Lord, even while in there. You know how hard it is to be a Christian inside the prison system? Oh, my Lord. But yeah, that's one of my stories where God really changed the man. And even though he had to deal with consequences, those consequences taught him a lot. And I'm sure he's coming home as a very mature. Now he's 25 years old. I met him at 16.
I want to touch on this because some of the people who may listen to this podcast episode may not understand like the psychology behind like, it's like, man, why isn't he just cooperating, lack of better words, and just telling the police and the jail everything that happened and everyone who's involved if they're willing to minimize the sentence? What are some of the psychological things at play? Because he knows, like you and I both know, being raised in that environment, like
Yeah.
if you are labeled that when you come home, it's not going to be an easy homecoming.
Mm-mm.
So he's willing to say, you know what? I'm taking responsibility for being there. I'm taking ownership. I was there. Uh, I'm here's my part in it. I'm not gonna tell you what anybody else does. This is me, and I gotta own these next 10 years for my part in it. Even though you guys are offering me a huge discount if I'm willing to give up some names. Like, because some people may not understand. Why don't you just tell the police everything and then you just do 2 years instead of 10?
Yeah. Okay, so some of the psychological stuff that goes on when you're pressured to live by the street code is that there's fear because he knew these young men. He grew up with them. They were from his neighborhood, so he knew if he would have been known as a snitch, he
Mm-hmm.
would have to move out of that neighborhood for the like permanently
Mm-hmm.
disappear because he would have to fear for his life. If he was known in prison, if he
Mm-hmm.
even went to do 2 years and they found out in there
Mm-hmm.
that he snitched to get a lesser sentence,
Mm-hmm.
he's looking at some serious physical
Mm-hmm.
bodily harm to him, and it's not, that will be a very long 2 years. And actually, I've seen people go to prison for 2 or 3 years, get beat up so much that they had to defend themselves, and their 2 year sentence turned into a 20-year sentence
Mm-hmm.
because they had to take somebody's life
Mm-hmm.
to defend theirs. So yeah, you don't want to go in there with those labels on you. Then there's also, that whole, street code is pride, is ego, is like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be known, I don't want nobody to, I don't want my name under that title. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of things that come from that pressure and having to live up to this identity that aims to destroy you. But I can understand why they don't. And I even told him, I was like, man, why? He's like, Pedro, I couldn't, man. As much as I know it might have been the right thing to do. He said, I just couldn't. I couldn't live with myself and do that to somebody. And even though those guys still got caught and they still did some time,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, how much time they got and how much it would have saved him from doing 10. Maybe he would have gotten just a few years, like you said. But yeah, there's a lot of that is fear. A lot of it is saving your life.
Mm-hmm.
Keep staying alive, staying alive. Like you see in
Mm-hmm.
movies, people don't want to snitch because they're like, what if I tell? I might be the next one hit.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, because a lot of these kids, so many times the advice that I would tell parents, and I would like your insight into it, because one of the things that can save a child's life is just like the hospitality of believers. So like just imagine your son or your daughter has friends and you may not like those friends. Like you see, like, man, that this kid is always getting into trouble. Why don't you just overextend and say, hey, why don't you guys come and hang out here, and let them be in a healthy Christian environment where they can, like, because you and I both know, like, if we, like you mentioned earlier in the beginning of the call, you didn't have that example. So like, what would have your life would have been like if someone invited you in as a teenager and you were able to see a husband love his wife, a husband love his kids, like what a good dinner looked like, what good communication looked like, because that can change the course of a young man's life. You see it in what's that movie, The Blind Side. I
hmm
think Sandra Bullock.
yeah, yeah,
Like, you hear some of these stories and you can see, like, man, you know what? Like, these kids are dealt a bad hand. We believe in individual responsibility, and there are consequences for the things you do, but we also have to understand, on the flip side, not everybody starts on the same line.
mm,
Like, some people are a couple of steps ahead towards success for the sheer fact that they grew up with both their parents, and their dad may have a master's degree and owned a home. And just by having what will be normal and typical for some communities, that's a couple of steps ahead than you and I. And that's not to say that we didn't make any wrong choices and we didn't pay for that. It's just the reality that they have some disadvantages because dad is around, because mom is addicted to drugs. Maybe mom has to work 2 jobs and they're latchkey kids and there's like a ton of no supervision, no affirmation. Mom is tired. All they have is their friends. All they have is the screen. And that's just leading down a bad path because of all of these external things that was not their fault. That was not their choice. So yeah, man, it's a lot. So just to land the plane, what's the biggest misconception about justice-involved youth?
The biggest misconception, and you see this sometimes even churches that don't want to get involved with this type of ministry look at it as, well, they're bad kids. This is what they deserve, right? And they're not bad kids. You know, they're kids that have been abandoned. They're kids that have been hurt. They're kids that are lacking love. They're kids that are shaped by their environment. You know, yes, we all born with a sinful nature, which therefore that alone should show us that we all need grace no matter what sins we've committed or where we're at, whether we never got caught. Some of us have probably committed many crimes and never been arrested because we just didn't get caught, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen, right? So we should consider the fact that these kids didn't ask, to be where they're at. Yes, there's some kids who do have 2 parents who didn't have no reason to go and commit a crime and just wanted to, be the cool kid or be, get be fall in, like fit in with the cool group, so they just, like, as they say, wannabes, all right. But most of the kids, I would say like 80% of the kids in juvenile justice facilities are kids that are lacking a father. They've been around domestic dispute, drugs. Their parents are in prison, in drug rehabs. They've never been shown none of the stuff that you mentioned a few minutes ago. They've never been at. Let me tell you, I've had kids in my car that I've picked up to mentor, and I'm like, hey, where would you like to go eat? And they're like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm like, well, you ever been to Chick-fil-A? No, I never been there. I'm like, wow, you know what I'm saying? Like, you never been to Chick-fil-A. It's just basic things that you would think. And I've even taken kids to like a water park, out of my own money. And I'm like, hey, you ever been, you want to hang out with me this weekend and come with my family? And really? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, let's just go to a water park. And I never been to a water park. And they walk in and it's like, these 16-year-olds look like they're 2-year-olds. They're looking around and they're like, wow, I never been to a place like this before, you know? So some of them are really like just they're good kids, and you see it by when you start to build relationship, when you start to love them, when you start to incline your ear. Hey, I want to hear more about you. I don't want to talk about me. I want to know what happened to you. What went on in your life? You know what I'm saying? What's going on? What do you think led you to where you are today? And many of them are actually self-aware. And they know, like, yeah, man, I've been angry. I've been mad when my father abandoned me. My mother's working 2 jobs. She's never home. Like, you start to hear the stories, and then your heart starts to like realize, like, man. And then some of them are super smart and got talents and gifts, and you're like, man, you're wasting away in here. Go use that out there and give God glory and become who God created you to be. And man, it's just beautiful to see that. And then, like I said, when they go home, many of them still hit me up on Instagram, Facebook. They text me. Sometimes I don't hear from them for a while, and out of nowhere, I'll get a message. Hey, Mr. Pedro, I just wanted to let you know, man, I ain't forget you. You've been like a father figure to me. I respect you. And I just wanted to let you know I got my own car. I got my GD. I went back and got me a trade. And I'm like, oh, my God, I love to hear this. Like, thank you. Thank you. I said, man, I know I did sound right. This is that kind of ministry that we don't get to see the fruit of our labor right away. You might see it years later, but your labor is not in vain.
Yeah. It reminds me, and we'll hang up right here. I saw a picture on Facebook, and it's like these little memes, but it was an empty room it was like before and after. And it was just like, some people don't understand progress. And it was just a mattress on a box spring on the floor, and how just a little level up of having a headboard and a nightstand was progress. And to them, like, these individuals are like, I just gotta, what certain people take for granted as normal are like blessings to underprivileged, under-resourced individuals who are coming out of the system and are in need of grace. No, so this was a fruitful conversation, brother. How can people support urban youth justice or even get involved?
We definitely always looking for mentors. And right now we're trying to build a reentry team, people that may not go inside necessarily, but are willing to follow up with the kids when they come out.
Mm-hmm.
Connect with the parents, connect with the transitional director that prepares them to come home, helps with resources in the community, kind of like a plug for each kid in different counties, because we serve kids from all over the state. So
Mm-hmm.
we're interested in mentors, that would just even be willing to lead a group or virtually. We could lead Bible stuff. We could do a lot of stuff virtually, even if the kid doesn't live around you. You can reach us on uyjinc.org, uyjinc.org. That's our website. I can be reached on my email, pedro@uyjinc.org. I'm on social media, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, my professional profile there as well. I do post about the ministry regularly and videos and some content or updates on what we're doing.
Man, you're doing good work. Like you said, it's not the cookie cutter youth ministry work, but it's still youth ministry. And Jesus said in Matthew 25, what you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. And we can't forget those who are incarcerated. So yeah, man, Dr. Pedro Rodriguez, thank you so much.
Get a copy.
Yeah, that's right. Go on Amazon, go on the website. If you are interested in serving, if your heart breaks for the situation that some of these boys and young girls find themselves in, and you're compelled to help, reach out to Dr. Pedro. We want to help these kids not get out the cycle of dysfunction. We want them not only to experience that inner transformation, we want that transformation to overflow in their physical lives as well. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're watching on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with whoever needs to hear this. Thank you, and God bless.